Welcome to the New York State Association of School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is the Benefits Administration Part A. Your host for today is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development. Today's program materials can be accessed by clicking on the link located in the reminder email sent this morning. Online course registrants can access the materials through the course main page. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. Following the presentation, you'll be invited to a live question and answer session. You may send chat questions at any time during this presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. Please address chat questions to the Q&A group using the drop-down list located at the bottom of the chat window. I will now gladly turn the call over to our host. Donna, please begin.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome to all of you to our first online course in our new School Business Management Institute, Benefits Administration, and thank you all for participating. And as you can see on your screen, Marcia Jones from Salamanca is going to facilitate this. Marcia put a lot of time and energy and effort into contacting the professionals and helping with the PowerPoints. And Marcia, I want to thank you for doing that. And we'll turn the controls over to you.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Marcia Jones. I'm the business manager for Salamanca City Central School District, way down in the southern tier. I want to welcome everybody this afternoon. We have the experts on with us regarding workers' compensation, dental insurance, and disability insurance. So as I've stated in previous emails, please make sure you ask any of your questions that you do have. Like I said, today's topics are going to include workers' compensation. That'll be the first topic to be discussed. Sue Correll of Self-Funding, Inc. will be doing that presentation. Once Sue is finished, dental insurance will be the next topic. And we do have two individuals from J&J Stannis and Company Incorporated, and they are Ellen Goldenson and Bill Regaglia, and Bill will be doing the presentation mainly for both dental, followed by the disability insurance, but both experts are on to handle questions that you may have. So if you have questions, you can either wait until the end of the presentation, where we do have a 15-minute set-aside time to ask those questions, or you can feel free to type them into the chat menu as you think of them as we go through the presentation. I do have a couple of reminders. The second webinar to this series will be on September 22nd at the same time from 2 to 3:30, and those topics will be covered include unemployment insurance, health insurance, and tax-sheltered annuities. And we do have the experts on hand to handle those topics as well. A couple other reminders. Don't forget that between the second webinar on the 22nd and the 30th to go on to the New York State Association of School Business Officials website, the link that you would have received in the email when you registered, to share some of the best practices of your district regarding any aspects of business administration. And we want you to post those right to the blog that we have currently started. And then we do have an assignment that will be emailed directly to me, and my email address is provided in those instructions, of things that you would like to change in your district that if you have learned through these two webinars. So if you can get those assignments to me by September 30th, that would be greatly appreciated. And like I said, any additional details can be found right on the website. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sue Correll of Self-Funding to begin the workers' compensation aspects.
Welcome, everybody. Just to give you a little background, I've been involved solely with workers' compensation exposure for employers since 1978, which actually makes me fairly old. I started out actually handling workers' compensation claims. I have a license to represent employers before the Workers' Compensation Board, and at the time, my employer, who was a large insurance carrier, took advantage of that and had me going to the Workers' Compensation Board to represent various employers. And quite frankly, I actually enjoyed that part of my job quite a bit. As time went on, I became a manager for the entire upstate New York operation of the insurance company I worked for. And in about 1990, I went to manage a third-party administration company, which is basically the claims handler for those employers who choose to be self-insured, but who choose not to administer their own claims. Then I came to Self-Funding Incorporated, where we are doing purely consulting business now. We do not sell insurance. We don't sell self-insurance because if it won't work, anyone doing a feasibility study can pretty much tell you it's not going to work. We work with many private and public entities on a project basis who may need us for a second opinion on what they're doing, how they're doing it, or maybe how they can better do it. You do need to know, since I am primarily talking to school districts, that either as groups or as standalone self-insurers, we probably work with about 100 school districts. As I said before, I am licensed to represent employers before the board, and I will tell you that with all the clients that we have, nobody has us do the same things for them. Moving on to the next slide. Workers' compensation in New York State is mandatory by law. There is no options here. Choices for coverage are either a traditional insurance carrier, which could be the Hartford or Zurich. You can always go to the state insurance fund, who has to accept any employer for workers' compensation coverage. And there is, of course, the standalone self-insurer. Those are primarily larger school districts that want to be self-insured, choose to do it alone instead of perhaps seeking the protection of being part of the last option in New York State, part of a self-insured group. I do want to tell you before we move on to the next slide, but you can move on to the next slide, that the Workers' Compensation Board, since Governor Spitzer came into since he was elected, is cracking down very heavily on people that are trying to slide by and not have workers' compensation coverage enforced. There is not only a penalty for not being insured, the law provides for a per day fine for every day you are found not to be insured. So just an FYI. Whether you're insured or part of a self-insured group or a standalone self-insurer, the players in this game, so to speak, are you, the employer, who obviously has to report claims by law. If you're self-insured, you probably have a third-party administrator. If you're not, you have an insurance carrier, be it a private carrier or the state fund. Or if you're very brave, you're doing your own work yourself. Usually standing between you and your carrier or third-party administrator is perhaps an agent or a broker if you're insured, or you have a consultant, which is somebody like ourselves, who kind of watch over the entire process, not only from the claims handling process, but the financials. And then, of course, there's the god of the entire process, the Workers' Compensation Board. So I'm going to try and explain all the processes before I go off the air. In the next slide, I'm going to go through the role of you, the employer. If you are lucky, if from my end I am lucky, you are extremely safety conscious, there is a united effort within your district, and we have no claims. And if that happens, nobody's going to hear from you, okay? And ultimately, the premium that you're either paying for insurance coverage, your premium to be part of a group, or the money you're setting aside in your budget process, if you're a standalone, ultimately can diminish, okay? Obviously, if we can prevent a claim, if safety is very, very big in your district, this is going to free up money for other things in your district. Let's assume, however, we're not living in utopia and factually an accident occurs. This is where all of the mandatory paperwork starts, and investigation should start. And most importantly, look at the accident and take a look at how it can be prevented from ever happening again. And before we move on to the next slide, I will tell you that I know from my experience that when accidents happen, most of the school districts have a good, solid incident report, and people do sit down and factually do complete them. Sometimes, though, they don't move on to that next step, and whether it be that person transferring that information to the official workers' compensation report of accident, which is called a C2, or passing it on to that central person in your district who's supposed to fill it out, it really now has to come to the top of a pile. We now not only have state mandates, which are being accompanied by fines for late reporting, but effective next year, the federal government is now going to have either your insurance company or your third-party administrator interface with them for any claim which has the prospects of costing more than $600. So we're very much in a big brother atmosphere where fines and penalties are being levied quickly and judiciously, and they're not looking the other way anymore. So just an FYI. So let's assume the accidents happen. Somebody's reporting it. It's getting into the paper. It's on paper now. The next step is this report's going to go to the insurance company or to the third-party administrator, which I will call a TPA from now on, so we don't waste a lot of time. And that carrier or TPA is going to file all the forms that have to be done on your behalf to the Workers' Compensation Board, or again, be subject to fine or penalty. And I would hope, whether you're self-insured in a group or obviously insured, that you get quarterly loss reports, or in many cases at least annually, so that you can review these loss runs, make sure that everybody that's being paid out of your funds, so to speak, is actually an employee of yours. And to look at claims that maybe have high reserves, you don't think that they should be, or vice versa. Okay? So that's where the third-party administrator is. So the next person involved here is you probably have an insurance agent or broker, or you may have somebody like myself. And the question becomes, what do you do for your money? Okay? If you're self-insured, what we do is send out RFPs looking for third-party administration services, usually every 3 years, just to look and see what's out there, and is there a better fit or a more competitive price for services. We usually seek out competitive stop-loss quotes or excess workers' compensation quotes, and we coordinate third-party administration services and assist in all financial aspects of either the consortium or the standalone self-insurer. And what does that mean? Usually we're called in for budgets, assistance in budgets. We look at history. What's been spent every year? Why is it a year when you have no claims you've spent the most money? Well, in workers' compensation, usually it's not the year that you have the bad claim that you pay the money. It's usually along the line 3 years later. Now, if you have an insurance broker, he's probably looking over the marketplace, probably annually, and is trying to solicit quotes for you for annual premiums, or be in a position to offer you other options. It might be first dollar coverage. It might be a large deductible program. There's all kinds of innovative means to cover this very expensive risk, and in many cases sometimes sharing the cost thereof, hoping maybe that safety will move itself to the top of the pile. But no matter who is helping you out, everyone should be assisting in reviewing your experience modifiers, your premiums, your payroll, and gathering annual and quarterly information for performance reports. And I know as a consultant, quite frankly, it's anything that the employer requires for state or federal reporting, or anything else that we can help you with. So what are we going to talk about today in our 15, 20, 30 minutes? We're going to talk about legislation, which is ever-changing and not always clear. We're going to talk about, if possible, preventing claims, although I think I kind of beat on that already. Reducing claims, and if we can't prevent or reduce the number of claims, how we can try and mitigate the cost and exposure for you, and then we'll touch on light duty. Our next slide is going to talk about legislation. We really haven't had major legislation changes since 1996. And no matter what political party anyone belonged to, or whether you were labor or not, everyone agreed that New York State was charging the most premium for workers' compensation coverage, but factually paying their employees less than almost every state in the union. So in 2007, changes were made literally, from what we understand, behind closed doors and went into effect in 2007. Okay? Major work is still going on literally every day to try and make these changes workable. The one thing that hit immediately was effective 7/107, when the most we could ever pay an employee before that was $400 a week. The legislation, which then Governor Spitzer signed, immediately allowed that $400 to go to a maximum of $500 a week. Effective 7/108, it went to $550. Effective 7/109, it went to $600. Now, bear in mind, most school districts I work with, these maximums are in play, because it's 2/3 of the average weekly wage of an employee up to these maximums. So we already, you can see a 50% rise in what we, meaning our industry, you the employer, are going to be paying your employee if they're out of work. And then on 7/1/2010, and again, we've had a change at the head of our government, it was supposed to go to a maximum rate of an average wage of a state employee. So bear in mind, it's taking an employee perhaps in Canaseraga, New York, an employee from Midtown Manhattan, and we're going to average that. And it is believed that that maximum could go up to $999 or $1,000. Okay, so again, think of this. In school districts, we do not see the effect of these increases hitting until about a year later or so. So in other words, towards the end of 2008, we're starting to see more money go out the door because most of your employees use their sick time or sick bank benefits, and we don't have to reimburse districts till about a year down the road. So I have an accountant that I worked with for a couple of school groups, and as he said, he foresees the tsunami hitting in about 2011 because that'll be the cumulative effect of these increases, which have been steady for 3 straight years. Okay? Now, what did we as the employer get in return for these automatic and very quick increases in wage benefit to injured workers? Well, in the next slide, I will show you that we didn't get a whole lot. Okay, but here's what we've been promised. We did immediately get a prescription fee schedule because outside of the state of Texas, only New York and Texas, admittedly by pharmaceutical vendors, have told us that the only states where they literally had rape and pillage was New York and Texas. Medication vendors were literally buying receivables from the local drugstore, and it was a win-win for the drugstore because the drugstore or the Wegmans or the Tops or whoever literally could get rid of their collections clerk. And these third-party vendors would come in and say, you sold $100 worth of meds this week, give us your bills, we'll give you the $100, and we'll go and collect it. Well, what they were doing is tripling the cost of that $5 prescription for ampicillin or that $32 prescription, for the anti-inflammatory or something. So we put an end to that, and it was magnificent. We were using the Medicare or Medicaid fee schedule, but then all of the pharmacists threatened not to accept workers' comp, so we've got a compromise, which is better than nothing, but was certainly not as good as what, we initially had. Outside of that, I hate to say it, we've not been given anything back yet. We've been promised that there will be mandatory settlement offers. In other words, sadly, somebody's going to put a gun to our head and make us offer settlements to people. We don't know how that's going to work because I could offer somebody who's getting $300 a week, $2 to settle. They're obviously not going to take it. In effect right now is something called a rocket docket. In the old days, if we suspected a case was less than legitimate or the body part really wasn't hurt, regardless of what an employee said, we would, quote, controvert it or fight it. Today, if we controvert it, it's going to be put ahead of any other claim adjudication process. We are literally going to be told we have to have all our ducks in line, and we have to be ready to litigate. And in many cases, we haven't had the time to fully develop a case or fully investigate it. And the adjudication process is very one-sided, just so you know. If we don't show up at a hearing or we don't produce our witnesses, we are fined. If the employee doesn't feel like showing up, not only will he not be fined, chances are he's going to be given another chance. And we're going to have to line our witnesses up a second time and show up. It is the workers' compensation law, but now everything that used to be somewhat reasonable is now really hinged to a fine or penalty. The medical guideline revision, which we've been told is kind of going to be the all-encompassing answer that will balance out the large increase in wage benefits we're paying people, has been in print. Let's put it this way. Version number 1 was in print probably over a year ago. The guideline we have right now is about 1/4 of an inch thick. The new one is it's in 3 or 4 volumes. It's probably the size of 3/4 the size of a metropolitan telephone book. I took the time to read most of the version 1. It's pretty good. But if they don't give us any teeth to argue some of the opinions, it probably is just a large piece of paper, a large book with a lot of pieces of papers in it. The second version came out about 2 or 3 months ago because we've been promised this is going to go into effect in November. And sadly and factually, the only thing that changed after we printed it all out was the date on the front. So we're not quite there yet. We're hoping. And in addition, the chairman, who was appointed by then Governor Spitzer, suddenly resigned in May of this year, which, given that his background was litigation and prosecution, maybe it's not a bad thing because he's been replaced by a workers' compensation law judge, which, although he's definitely pro-labor, at the end of the day, he knows the system and knows the law. I think of all of you have been pained like we have been with the fact that 1-page forms have now been replaced with 4-page forms, and maybe I don't think they'll ever go back to 1 page now, but at the end of the day, maybe things like that won't happen anymore. And at the end of the day, if you walk away from this webinar with nothing else, we are getting fined and penalties are being given to everybody because the state just doesn't have any money. So moving on, let's talk within reason about and I'll do this fairly quickly now because I think I'm going to start running out of time. As I said, we'd like to prevent claims. We'd never hear from you. Whatever you pay for workers' comp would go down. Everyone would be happy. But the reality is accidents happen. In some cases, there's absolutely no prevention. So what do we have to do? our prevention, reduction, and mitigation need to be channeled in the directions of cases that are questionable or drawn out. So let's go to prevention. That's the next slide. If we could prevent all losses, I wouldn't even be talking to you today. And you and your district, your workday would be extremely predictable. Your budget issues would be predictable too. And quite frankly, safety is not that expensive, and the alternative is really more time consuming. Okay? So I'm going to quickly, and we've talked about it already. What happens when there's an accident? You fill out an incident. Step 2 is a C2. And again, I prompt all of you, get those things moving. Do not sit on them. If they're arriving late at the comp board, chances are you're going to be penalized. PESH, public employee safety and health. If there is a death, God forbid, in your district, okay, if there is a bigger claim involving several people, call them. Worst case, they will tell you they're not interested, but you do not want to be fined or penalized by them too, okay? And then obviously, after your in-house incidents, we get the involvement from the workers' comp board. So let's move on to the next slide. I think we talked about, again, the incident in the C2 as we went along. And in the next slide, I'll tell you why. That C2 initiates the claim. You can move on to the next slide. With your insurance carrier or your TPA, who in turn should be reviewing those and calling you if there's any questions. But that's being filed with the Workers' Compensation Board. Once that document is signed or filed by you, it becomes a legal instrument and is considered a statement of fact. And remember that. It's the employer's report of accident. It is not time to give that report to the employee and ask him to fill it out. And in the next slide, basically, I'm going to remind you, fill it out as completely and correctly and as accurately as you can. If you can't get all the facts, do the best you can and send it in. Let your TPA or insurance carrier do the tracking after that. They can always call you and say, do I have your permission to change the right leg to the left leg if there's been an error? Okay? All I can tell you is if we have to straighten this out after the fact, people are going to end up at the comp board, which involves legal expenses. And if you go to the next slide, you'll show where all these little expenses mean larger premiums for your workers' compensation budget. Larger premiums means larger budgets for your taxpayers. Increased taxes don't make your taxpayers happy. And again, anything wrong, anything late, you're going to be fined, okay? And then my next slide will tell you again, if you haven't figured it out already, New York State is seriously looking for fine and penalty money. And my next slide, I'm going to quickly point out that there's a section of the law called Section, I think, 19. It should be Section 1, because basically it says in layman's terms that it is presumed by law that without overwhelming evidence to the contrary, that if an employee comes to you and says they were hurt at work, they were. If you find an employee unconscious in the middle of an empty room, whether he's dead or alive, you have to presume that something in your school, something in that room, something, okay, caused that to happen in the course of his employment. Medical evidence may end up telling us all that it did not, but you have to presume that it happened because of something at work. Please fill out that incident report or C2 as soon as you can. Then, with that form, or before you send that form to your broker or your TPA or, or your insurance carrier, voice your concerns. Anybody I work with, I ask them, do not file that C2 with the comp board directly. Call me, call your carrier, call your TPA, and we'll work with it then. I touched on PESH already, so I'm not going to beat it to death, but, there is a website, and that's Public Employee Safety and Health, and I think you guys probably fill out your PESH logs at the end of the year. So they're the guys that look at your annual filings and postings. But again, if there's a death, call them. Our next couple of slides, and I'm not going to get into them in terrible detail, but the Workers' Compensation Board, what happens to that piece of paper when it first goes into the comp board? There's really only two kinds of claims, as my next slide will show. There's medical onlys, and then there's indemnity cases. The next slide tells you that the medical only claim is basically a claim with no lost time beyond 7 days. The employee is really looking only for payment of medical bills or mileage and reimbursement. There's no surgery involved. There's no potential serious facial disfigurement, and there's little or no involvement by the Workers' Compensation Board except them looking at it. Now, the other claims, and that's the next slide, is the indemnity claim. There is lost time beyond 7 days and or possible permanency as a result of an injury or surgery or a potential serious facial disfigurement. The comp board will get involved in these. And I say that because I could have a broken ankle. I can get, as long as I can drive or somebody will take me to work, I'll come to work. However, your custodial staff won't be able to do that. So at the end of the day, the comp board's not going to discriminate and say, we're not interested in Sue's claim because she didn't lose time, but we're very concerned about Joe's case because he did. No, they're interested in both of them because a fracture is a serious injury. So anyway, cases they're involved in, they assign them a number. There's somebody at the board routinely reviewing them. And as the case stabilizes, they're going to try and bring it to closure. And if they feel there's disagreement on how much somebody's being paid, how long they're being paid, or your employee even mentions he's not happy about something, there will probably be some type of a hearing. The next two slides we can go through quickly. The medical only claim's easy, as I said. You fill out a C2, you send it to your insurance carrier, TPA. The board takes a look at it, kind of files it away, and that's the end of it. The next slide shows you we're an indemnity case, and I put, this is for today because everything changes at the board, at the Workers' Compensation Board, I think every 10 minutes. But as you can see, the comp board suddenly assembles a file, and they're looking at everything. The employer not only sends just the report of the accident, they've got to tell us every time somebody's in and out of work. And obviously, they've got their own internal issues about, continuing to run a school district. And the TPA suddenly doesn't have a file that generally can close in 90 days. They suddenly have a file that may be open for years. They have to start thinking about independent medical exams, medical case managers, vocational placements. It's a lot of work. So, what in the next slide do we want to remember about all this? The scales of justice are not equal. This is the Workers' Compensation Law, and it wasn't Section 19, it was 21. Presumptions, we're going to get penalties and fines for late reporting. I actually went to a meeting last week with a municipality involving a couple things, and I had an attorney who both was a comp attorney and a labor law attorney, and they said, okay, let's talk about the comp case. And all she said was, you're a loser when you walked in. Let's move on to the labor case. So, there we go. Now, what happens at work? And I think you all know that, okay? First thing you got to do is take his report, but then what happens? Your person who's hurt needs to be replaced. Do you do temporary help? Do you do overtime? Do you ask that department of 4, who's now a department of 3, to go the extra mile? We all know that outside of your office, there's wage benefits and medical treatments that the employee is entitled to. But what else is going on? And I think in the next slide, you know better than I do. There's health insurance, there's vacation accruals, there's sick time. There's a lot of money, that this claim is costing. Some of it's silent until you really sit down and think about it. So in my next slide, I'm sitting there thinking, we've got to fill the gap of a missing employee. It costs money. You've got ongoing medical care and wages. You've got employer contributions. So what do? We got to get them back to work, okay, if we can't prevent the accident. So, what's the best way to get an employee back to work? Communication. The next slide shows your claims adjuster. This, and I've been there, and I was there before the real hell, which is the 2007 legislation. This person is probably handling 200 to 300 claims. Okay, they have to file forms and issue checks in very strict statutory time frames, or they risk penalty. In all cases, they generally take a lot of verbal abuse, and you're never going to get a thank you. The next slide again shows they want their case closed more than anybody in the world, but they suffer when there's no communication from you. They're trying to stay proactive in a system that is absolutely thriving and drowning in paper, fines, penalties. And the comp board's calling, always asking, why can't you do this? Why don't you do this? You didn't file this. And they tell them they did file it. And it's in somebody else's file. Send it again. So how can you help? How can you help ease the pain in your own building and ease the pain of this poor claims adjuster? If you hear or talk to people within your department or the injured worker, and, if you see lack of medical progress or really good medical progress, but you got a doctor that took a sabbatical and went to Ireland, well, you know what? We need to get involved and maybe try and get them a release for work somewhere else. We need to know immediately of a return to work or a subsequent period of disability that may start after that first return to work that is related to that original accident, because sometimes internal coding doesn't allow maybe your central person to know that Joe's out of work again because the pin that was in his ankle needs to be taken out. He's using sick time or something, and all of a sudden we get a medical report or a note from the comp board along with the penalty, I might add, because we didn't file a form, and we need to know this. Any activity that leads you to believe the injured worker is not as disabled as he or she is leading everyone to believe. Critical. They go see our doctor, they're limping in and they're using canes and crutches, and you see them in Walmart the day after Thanksgiving hauling a 42-inch TV out. We need to know that. Rumors of any type, either about family illnesses, other employment, additions to home, things that they participate in, i.e. baseball, volleyball, bowling, we need to know that. If you get an application for Social Security disability, if you know they have long-term disability like AFLAC, let us know. By law, can we ask them? Not really, but if they volunteered or you tell us, that can kind of figure out. We find out when people collect more from comp and outside insurance policies, we know they're not going to come back to work. On the next slide, another item to think about is if you call your employees every once in a while with the premise that you care about them, you want to know how they're doing, and when you can maybe expect to have them back, and they're never home. In the 70s and 80s, I would call people. There was no caller ID. They didn't have 3 other cell phone numbers that they could hide from me, and I would actually talk to people. Today, dodging the phone is very easy. We're always leery, too, of the disabled person who always has a third party speak for him or her. When we get a disgruntled husband or wife yelling all the time and speaking and never, for all we know, the employee's down in Florida fishing. And then there's always the return to work date that the doctor says in, that keeps sending in that says he's coming back to work July 1st. July 1st he walks in, it becomes August 1st. August 1st becomes September 1st. We need to know that, because they're really just stringing us along. And then we even have a few doctors who say they're never going to come back to work. So, what are the red flags? When should you call your? If you're not comfortable calling your claims adjuster and they don't return calls, call your broker, call your consultant. What can we do with some of these things that are moving too slowly? By law, we have a right to schedule an independent medical examination with a physician of our choice. We can ask that a rehabilitation specialist or medical case manager start working with your employee, and although by law they can slam the door on this person, we document the fact that they won't accept the help but there are times we can have them working the phones to speak one-on-one to other medical professionals. And then there's always the last resort, I shouldn't say second last resort, we may need to put a private detective on the case. And if we do, we always tell you, at least, the people I work with, and we will even come and ask if you have any kind of an ID picture or something, because that'll, keep the cost down. And then, if nothing works, there's always Section 71. And I work with enough labor attorneys to know that there's steps in doing this, but you want to do it. And at the end of the day, if you communicate, I think we can get to a point where some of these cases can come to a conclusion. And as I tell many of my employers, we've got two problems here. One is your internal labor issue, the personnel issue, and then there's the comp issue. And sometimes I can't make the comp go away, but maybe I can at least help you to clean up your personnel issue, and you can get another employee in to fill that position. And that's all I have. And I have one question. I don't know if anybody wants me to answer it.
Thank you, Sue. I do know that there is one question that came up so far, typed. Do you see that, Sue, from Shelley?
Yes, I can.
Did you want to address that now?
Sure. If an employee comes to you and fills out an incident form but says he or she just wants to put it on the record in case there is an issue in the future, are we obligated to fill out the C2? No, you are not. In the old days, I would tell you to turn over the C2, and under Section 110, which has not changed, but which I don't think is being highly publicized, a C2 does not have to be filed if the lost time does not exceed the date of the accident plus one more day, and or there is no medical care beyond an emergency visit and a follow-up. Okay, if you can keep it within that criteria, you don't have to file the C2. And if that employee comes back to you in a year and says, remember that incident? Well, guess what? It's a lot worse now. At that point, you'd fill out the C2, put down that the employee did report it to you timely, and when it says what date did you fill out the C2, put the real date. And you should not have a problem.
All right. Thank you, Sue. And Sue will be on at the end of the webinar to answer any additional questions that you have. Now we'll turn it over to Bill and Ellen of J.J. Stanis & Company to start off with dental and disability insurance.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to the station and listening to all of our backgrounds here in our presentations. A little bit about my background. I've been in the business over 40 years, both as an underwriter and an insurance executive and as a consultant. J.J. Stanis & Company is a TPA which covers about 100 school districts in the New York State area. We administer their dental, we administer their life, long-term disability, and we also do excess major medical and vision coverage. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. Let's get into the actual topics. We're going to give you a brief overview of each topic. The first one is group long-term disability insurance, or otherwise known as LTD, or long-term disability. As you know, many school districts today, in order to cover events where people go out on disability, they usually have written agreements, written plans that are formal and showing what the employee is entitled to and so forth. That's one form of it. And the other form is that they also have self-insured form where the school district itself, due to the sick leave involved, self-insures the time that the employee is out on sick leave. When you're considering implementing one of these plans, you have to take into consideration the demographics of the group, the accumulation of your sick time, what other income is available in the event of a disability. After considering all of these, you can then adopt and come up with a plan design to meet your group's needs.
Next slide.
How do we get to the most cost-effective pricing for you? Well, the main ingredient is to get the census information of the people involved in the calculation. That is their date of birth, gender, monthly or annual salaries, and job position. Sometimes plans are based on the actual position of the people involved. If a carrier, some carriers require prior experience, usually 3 years of premium along with open and closed claims. That's usually for cases of more than 200 or 300 lives where they would ask for that information. And secondly, they would also ask for that information if you currently have the long-term disability coverage and you're now looking to bid it out to see if you can get a lesser cost or a better plan. All this information is necessary to give you the best rate. Each plan is made up of several provisions. There's the elimination period. The elimination period is the waiting period that you incur prior to the onset of disability. The elimination periods usually last anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. The most common elimination period is either 90 or 180 days. Some of these plans take into consideration the sick time. For example, the greater of sick time or 90 or 180 days. Now, by disability, we mean the not being able to perform the duties of your occupation. So if someone is ill and can't perform the duties of their occupation, they can, during that period of time that they're waiting to go into benefit, that's known as the elimination period. Now, in order to file for a disability claim, there must be a claim form that must be filled out along with a physician's statement stating what the reason is why the individual cannot perform the duties of their own occupation for a specific time.
Next slide.
Monthly benefit calculations. Plans vary anywhere between 50 and 60% of monthly earnings to a maximum dollar amount. The maximum benefit can be determined by the negotiated contracts between the unions and the district or based on positions held within the district. For example, superintendents, assistant superintendents may have a higher max than the rest of the employees of the district. To determine the maximum benefit, what you do is you take the highest salary in the group, divide it by 12 to get the monthly salary, multiply it by the percentage of monthly earnings in the policy. For example, as listed, highest salary $96,000 divided by 12, monthly salary $8,000. 60% of that is $4,800. That would be the monthly maximum for a plan of that magnitude.
Next slide.
Duration of benefits. This depends on the age of the insured and when disability begins. If it's before age 60, benefits are usually paid to age 65. If a person is still working and it's after age 60 and they become disabled, like say at 67, 68, etc., it's based on the person's Social Security normal retirement age, and there's a schedule involved. For example, if you went out at age 65, benefits would be paid for 2 years. For mental and nervous disorder and substance abuse, the maximum number of monthly payments that you can receive under a long-term disability plan is generally 24 months. I have never seen anything greater than that, but that's possible to be if it's negotiated and the carriers are willing to quote that plan. Most of your Social Security benefits or your disability benefits,
Next slide.
should be offset by monthly benefits can be reduced by Social Security benefits, workers' compensation payments, and pension or retirement benefits. Usually offset the amount of the benefits you're receiving. So that $4,800 a month could be reduced down to something much, much less, depending on the offsets involved. Next slide. Dental insurance. Okay, on the dental insurance, there's two types of dental plans in
Next slide.
the works. There's a insured dental plan, and then there's a self-insured dental plan. The differences are as follows. Under an insured dental plan, you pay the carrier monthly premiums, and that premium goes for covering the claims funding, the administration of the plan, and the claim reserves, and any profit that the carrier may want to make. The self-insured plan, depending on the size of the client, can be very beneficial in the sense that what you're doing is you're limiting the cost of the plan and just funding the employer's claims or the claims during, and then funding the a fee for the third-party administrator to administer those claims. In order to obtain a quote for dental insurance, both self-insured and insured, you would need a census requirement, again, showing the date of birth, gender, zip code, and coverage tier, meaning single or family, employee and spouse, etc., depending on how you want to set up your rating structure. For groups of 500 lives or more, some carriers generally expect experience, which is premiums versus claims for the last 3 or 4 years, if available.
Next slide.
There are different types of dental plans. There's the Indemnity Ppo Plan. Benefits are provided if the provider is out of network or part of a provider network. You can work with your administrator to determine the PPO networks that are available to you. You'll also be able to determine which network gives you the largest amount of network providers for the users of the policy. There are many different networks out there, depending on where you're located, and where your employees are located. It's important to really review this portion of any quote that you may get to make sure that you're covering the majority of your people in the plan. A DMO plan is a plan where you pick a designated dentist, and then that dentist is your dentist for the rest of that plan year. And you cannot use anyone else but that dentist. That's another type of plan. There are also plans that are a mixture of a DMO and an indemnity type plan also. Besides reasonable and customary plans, or as we usually call them, usual and customary plans. Services are based upon a table that is specific to the zip code of the provider and the claims received within that zip code. These tables are usually updated at least twice a year by the carrier. The carrier uses an outside service to provide this information to them. It's usually not the carrier's own amounts, although there are some carriers who are large enough today and would have enough experience behind them that they can develop their own usual and customary charges. A schedule plan is a plan based on a negotiated schedule which lists a dollar amount for each procedure, such as $50 for cleaning, $40 or $50 for a extract or a filling, etc. And then there's also plans that are combinations of both reasonable, customary, and scheduled plans. Any of these plans can have a PPO benefit where all services will be paid according to the negotiated rate for each procedure.
Next slide.
For example, payable at 100% for all preventive and diagnostic procedures, exams, x-rays, etc. Payable at 80% for restorative procedures, such as fillings, extracts, root canal. Payable at 50% for all major and orthodontic procedures, and crowns, dentures, and inlays. All of these benefits are generally subject to an annual deductible, a calendar year maximum, and certain limitations that apply to these services. For example, under orthodontia, usually there's a lifetime maximum benefit, usually of $1,000 to $1,200 in that range, and that's a lifetime maximum. And it's also integrated with the calendar year maximum. And the services are generally limited to children through age 19. Next slide.
Sure.
When a PPO plan is used, the insured sees an in-network provider. The benefits will be paid according to the negotiated fee schedule. When a schedule plan is used, the benefits are paid according to the schedule that was set up by the district or the group. There's some important information you should be aware of, that in New York State has increased the age of dependents on insured health policies to age 29. We are still waiting on the Insurance Department directive on how this will pertain to dental plans and potentially self-funded plans. Thank you so much for listening.
There's one question. Short-term disability, maternity leave considered long-term or short-term?
This is Marcia once again, and it looks like, Bill, if you can see the question from Gina, if you want to take that right now.
Is maternity leave considered long-term or short-term disability? Generally, it's considered long-term. Long-term. A lot of people go out on long-term disability. It's usually 9 months, and depending on the waiting period.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Donna Clement, and Michelle, if you could just let us know how people can call in a question.
Sure. Thank you, Donna. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who'd like to ask an audio question, please press the number 7 followed by the pound key on your telephone now. You'll be placed in the queue in the order received. Please wait for your name to be announced and be prepared to ask your question, or you may continue to send chat messages via the chat function. Again, audio questions, press 7 pound on your telephone now.
Okay, thank you. Now, Bill, you were talking about various carriers for dental insurance, and I was wondering if you could give us some ideas on who those carriers are.
Sure. Some of the carriers that are being used today are Guardian, MetLife, Prudential, let me think. Healthplex is another one we use big on Long Island down here. And MetLife I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Sue, do you have anything else that you would like to mention?
I'm just going to forewarn people that we get emails constantly in terms of change, and it's been never-ending change since March of 2007. So, sadly, that's about all we can tell you. And since we have a new chairman now, we don't know if he is going to continue with the prior agenda or if he's going to create his own. So I keep telling people, hold tight, stay the course, don't do anything crazy. I will tell you that the last thing we heard, this was last week or the week before, that the prior chair was conducting some, quote, secret meetings to monopolize the state of New York, which basically would mean that there would be no competition. It would be the state insurance fund as the carrier of choice and possibly self-insurance, but nothing else. So I think the new chair has been bombarded with questions on that, especially from the New York State Bar Association, because the other part of these alleged secret meetings would be that the adjudication process would be literally the state's way or the highway. There would be nobody arguing on either side for things that they felt were either right or wrong. So again, all I can tell you is stay tuned.
Change is with us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. What's the benefit of going to an all-state plan? Yeah.
The only one, because we have a lot of clients who are maybe formed a group because they weren't happy with the attention or lack thereof they or their employees got from the state fund. The advantage, I would say, rests purely with the state. They can start to be the point of premium collection.
Mhm.
And insurance companies, if that money is invested appropriately, is where the money is made. Between that and risk selection, of course. I guess the fear of the masses is that the money would be collected, but maybe not so much invested as to be used to, fund budget gaps.
Oh, now we know.
In 3 or 4 years, when there's no money to pay claims, because if you're a brand new self-insurer, for example, and I can show you that statistically, the first year you're not paying much money. You're paying some routine medical bills. You're not paying awards in the public sector. You're not reimbursing wages yet. And then the second year you might start paying some wages back, might start paying some schedule loss of use awards. But the real money starts to flow out the door, and you kind of reach a plateau and with some hope level out is year 3 or 4. Okay? So think of all that money that should be sitting there, okay?
Mhm.
So that it can be there when it's needed in year 3 or 4. But what if it's gone? I would assume that premiums would have to go up then to those existing employers, whoever may be left. And that approach has failed in many states. I think there's only 6 states, somebody was telling me the other day, in the entire country that are monopolistic, one of which I think is one of the Carolinas, and allegedly they're trying to entice carriers back in to the state. And Ohio, I understand it is not really doing very well.
Wow.
So,
Sue,
again,
this is Marcia from Salamanca.
Mm-hmm.
And that you and I have talked about quite often is our frequent flyers.
Yes.
Maybe you should give a little bit of advice to us sitting in business offices who sees the same employee coming in every year with a injury. What can we do to try to mitigate that?
Well, the way to mitigate it, number one, is especially if you're not self-insured. Well, let's pretend you're self-insured, but let's also assume you're with an insurance carrier. Okay? If you're a brand new self-insurer or you've got a new TPA, you've got to let the new TPA know that this person is, quote, a frequent flyer, and start to look at any patterns. Some of them knock you right off your chair. It's every hunting season. It's a chronic abuser of sick time. They just went in and asked for some special time off or to tap into the sick bank because my mother's sick. They're told they can't get it, and all of a sudden they hurt their back. Again, communication. If you have the means, to somehow over-investigate the alleged accidents, start really pushing for witnesses, maybe bringing in, I do that a lot when an employer calls me and says, Sue, I'm so fed up with this, blah, 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 and I'd say, are there witnesses? And they say yes. I go, you know what, I'm going to send so-and-so in, and we're going to take written statements from everybody tomorrow. Not only the employer, but the alleged witnesses.
And hopefully that will discourage them from.
Well, they might. Again, sometimes if the process of reporting the claim, having it accepted without question, again under the presumptions rule, becomes too easy, it's going to be continue to be done. If it becomes a little more difficult and people are looking a little closer and they're asking more questions, not only is that person maybe beginning to realize it's not going to be easy, but what if he tells a few people? Or the people you're taking the witness statements from understand what the process is.
Mm-hmm.
I had one the other day where the employee got a lot of money on a loss of use for an arm that I was not happy with the TPA. Okay, they should have done a little bit more and negotiating it, but that's another story. That same person came in to work one day and said, "Can you get me into our occupational clinic? I hurt myself playing with the kids on the floor this weekend."
Oh.
And 3 days later, he files an injury report. Well, the third-party administrator should have immediately sent somebody out to take a statement from everybody and anybody.
Mhm.
Get a medical authorization. Find out what facility he went to after he hurt himself playing with the kids on the floor, and start piecing it together. We're getting a new TPA for that particular account.
Good idea. Good idea. Yeah. Bill and Ellen, I have a question. When you talked about the dental...
Actually, before you go back to
Sure.
the dental question, can I just clarify the maternity?
Sure.
If you have a normal pregnancy and you go out and deliver, that would be covered under short-term disability. If you're pregnant and unfortunately, you have a medical condition that is stopping you from doing your normal occupation at work, that would be considered long-term disability.
Okay, that clears that up. Thank you.
If it's a normal pregnancy, it would be definitely short-term disability.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Mhm.
All right?
I'm looking at the two dental plans that you showed and wondering what the pros and cons are of those.
Well, if you're in an insured plan, the pro is that the insurance company is responsible for all the payment of the claims, and if you run out of money, well, then the insurance company, that's tough luck, you know what I mean? But under a self-insured plan, you have to have the money available to fund those claims every month. So that money's always got to be there. So that's really the one of the main differences between the two plans. In a insured plan, the carrier is on the hook for the payment of those claims, even if the client goes bankrupt. But that's not the case in a self-insured plan. The money has to be there each month to pay those claims.
Okay, that makes a big difference.
Right.
And Bill and Ellen, do you have anything else that you would like to add on any part of what you spoke on?
No, I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered it. I guess we're just relying on questions via the web or by email.
Okay. And Michelle, do we have any one in queue?
Currently no questions on queue. Again, for those who would like to ask an audio question, 7# on your telephone now, please.
Okay, thank you. Marcia, anything that you can think of in your experience in the school district that would be helpful, since we have the experts here, and maybe not even a topic that they discuss, but something that has come up?
Well, for Salamanca School District, we don't offer long-term disability insurance to any of our employees, and we rely mainly on the sick banks of the collective bargaining agreements that kind of cover that gap there. So for me, it's kind of interesting to know how many other districts out there have long-term disability plans, whether they have them on all their employees, perhaps maybe just on the superintendent or assistant superintendents.
Okay.
And then for us at Salamanca, we don't offer dental insurance to any of our employees, but we do offer AFLAC, which does have the option of that dental coverage, not necessarily dental insurance, but that coverage. Right. So it was another interesting topic for me. And again, how many other districts out there offer dental insurance to the employees?
Well, I can't tell you exactly how many in the whole state. I can tell you here in New York, we have over 100 districts that offer dental insurance downstate here on Long Island and maybe up through Westchester. That's a big coverage, and so is long-term disability. So, I mean, that's the best I can answer your question. I can't say anything more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill, with long-term disability, do the districts normally cover all of their employees with the policies?
Well, most of the time it's covering just the teachers, because they negotiate that for collective bargaining.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else that we should be aware of? Anything new that's coming? I know, Sue, you've mentioned some new things coming. Anything else to be aware of? Or
All I can tell you is when in doubt, pick up the phone. Number one, to whomever you need to. They can be your broker or your consultant, even your insurance carrier or TPA. Number two, all I can tell you is the state is looking for money. Don't sit on things. If somebody requests a form, they're not doing it because some robot's punching it out. If your carrier or TPA is requesting a C-240 or a C-11 and you sit there and go, there's been no lost time, why do I have to do this? I guarantee you there's somebody punching it out at the comp board waiting for no reply because it logically isn't needed. But that may be this week's game in collecting a $50 penalty.
Oh, wow. Now, we do have a question, an audio question.
Oh, okay.
Our first question comes from Pocantico Hills, CSD.
Yes, hi. This is a dental question, and I'm not sure if it can be answered or not. Is it more cost-effective for school districts to offer dental plans? Because like Somers, we also have AFLAC, our dental plan.
Well, actually, going through AFLAC is probably the least expensive approach to offering dental insurance.
And why is that?
I can best answer that from what I understand the way they offer their plans.
What is it?
It's more of a voluntary type plan.
Right.
Whereas our experience has been that most of the districts that offer dental, it's not voluntary, and it's usually through collective bargaining.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a question came in from Shelley Matisse, and can you give a brief overview of the time frame within which some of the common workers' comp forms are required?
Okay, once you're aware of an accident, technically and by law, you should have that filed within 10 days. Okay, so Susie walks in the door, says, I cut my finger. It still doesn't look like a big deal, but you better take that report as an incident. If it blows up, you better have that reported within 10 days of knowing of the accident and or that it is something less than a put a Band-Aid on type claim. Okay? That's about all I can tell you. In the old days, employees, believe it or not, had 2 years to report their claim.
Wow.
Talk about the scales of justice not being equal. However, if they reported 2 years in 1 day, it's almost automatically thrown out. But I have had 2 decisions within the last 3 to 4 months, both involving school districts, where the employee hurt himself, didn't tell anybody, sought medical care, okay, then say 2 months down the road goes, I'm out of work, my doctor says it's comp, and oh yeah, by the way, I did hurt myself 2 months ago. I've seen the board throw those out twice in the last 3 to 4 months.
Oh,
so
wow.
Good documentation, critical. The ones we get hurt on are the ones where the business official gets the accident report and it looks like it's late. We controvert it and find out that actually the person left word of the accident, on a Paste-It somewhere, or called the immediate supervisor and left a voicemail, and it kind of went to the bottom of the pile. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, we're fighting a case only to have the employee come in, say I did X, Y, and Z, and at that point the claim gets not only established, but we'll probably get a fine of $150 for a frivolous controversy.
Okay. Wow.
Again, fines and penalties.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So within 10 days they should...
If you can possibly do that,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. By law, if somebody's disabled, on the 14th to 18th day, your TPA or insurance carrier is supposed to file a form that says, I accept this case and I will pay them. I accept this case, but I'm not paying them because, you're continuing wages or there's no medical evidence of disability, blah, blah, blah. Or third option, we're fighting it, and this is why.
Okay. Now, Shelley has an added piece here.
Mm-hmm.
What if you hear through the grapevine someone was injured at work?
Yank them in.
You should pursue it?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Bring them in. I've had, through the many years I've been doing this, have people mention things like this, and I always say, can you bring them in and just look them right in the eyes, eyeball to eyeball, and say, I've heard you're having some problems, And if they say, where are you hearing this? And it's like, through the grapevine. I'm only reiterating, that school policy is such that. Okay?
If you're hurt, we'd really like to help you out because we need to know about it and we want to file the correct paperwork.
Yes, here's an incident report. If you want, I'll help you fill it out. Or we can go through the questions while you're sitting here. But if it's not, you've really cleared the air on the rumors or innuendos, and you can make it clear that I'm going to document our conversation and put it in the personnel folder, Yeah. And I have some employers even go a step further and say, I'm going to write this up and I will ask you to sign it.
And so then they would hold on to it.
Put it in the personnel folder.
And then if something comes up like you were saying later on, then you have it.
Because a lot of times people that are planning things like this maybe know that they're going to quit.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Or they're going to, and rather than face you face-to-face while they are employed, they wait till they're gone. I mean, an employee can leave your employee and then call the comp board and say, I had an accident.
Oh,
and the comp board's not going to say, oh, did you report it timely? They're going to immediately say, we'll send you the forms.
Oh.
And then what they will do, not call you about it, they're going to alert your workers' compensation carrier of record or your TPA of record, and they're going to say, send us a C2. And we may not agree. You may not agree. But that's only your opportunity to file a negative C2 then.
Okay.
Which is basically saying date of loss alleged, date of loss unknown, Body part unknown.
Wow. Now, Nicole has a question, and it says, if an employee gets injured on the job but retires before they have surgery or therapy, what happens to the claim? Can the district be continuously responsible after someone is retired?
Okay. Anybody that gets hurt at work, and that includes a hangnail, is by law given 18 years of protection. Okay?
How many?
18.
Wow.
So if I fall today at work and I hurt myself and I seek a little bit of medical attention, it's taken care of. Let's fast forward 6 months and I retire. And now I decide to have surgery. Okay? You are still going to be responsible for the surgery, but if your insurance company or your TPA has been communicating with you, okay, we should be able to take the position that that person is retired, therefore has chosen not to have an earning capacity, and therefore should not be entitled to weekly wage benefits.
Okay, so because they've retired.
Right.
Yeah. Does it always work that way?
A lot of times we might find out after the fact sometimes. It might even be me picking something up, or in the old days, almost everybody with an indemnity claim had their day in court. Okay? So attorneys, or when I was a hearing rep, you'd routinely say, or the judge would say, are you working? Okay? And if the employee said no, somebody at that table better have the antennas up big enough to say, why not?
Yeah.
And they may tell you, oh, my wife is terminally ill. You know what I mean? It should never be assumed that they're not working because of the work-related accident. But today, half of this stuff is being done on paper. people are reviewing a ream of paper and they're going, okay, I think we should award this person lost time. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, you get this award, and you better have an answer for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or it's just it automatically. There's a fine line between handling a claim and processing a claim. Processing is just pushing paper. Handling it is occasionally asking a question, Like if your employee's 68 years old, somebody should be asking if that person is retiring. Or school districts in particular, not lately, but let's go back 5 or 6 years when, incentives were being offered for people to retire. Yeah. Some of the smarter employees had workers' comp claims just before they retired. And, I handle enough districts that I'd kind of jump on it and say, is this one of the people that took the incentives? And I'd ask for the paperwork. Or sometimes people write lovely letters saying, I've got my 20 years in, I've got my 30 years in, I've enjoyed working in the district, I loved every day with the children, but now it's time for me and my husband to jump in the RV and, travel all over the country. I may ask you for that letter.
Oh, okay. That's their retirement letter. And, why are they filing that claim?
Of course, when you get that letter that says, I'm retiring because that time I fell upstairs.
Right. Right.
Then you're going to pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it seems reasonable enough that you would.
But the comp case may go on long after that person is gone, to answer the question.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Any last bit of advice, cautions?
Well, if it's anybody I do business with, as I tell them at every meeting, if you have a question, call me.
Okay.
Stalk me, find me.
Right. And Bill and Ellen, any last piece of advice that you'd offer about long-term disability or dental plans?
Well, as far as long-term disability is concerned, I think it's a complicated benefit. It's one that you have to really look at very cautiously to make sure that it's meeting the needs of your district. And as far as the dental is concerned, that's, again, a negotiated item. We don't usually go around pushing it unless we know that a district is definitely interested in it. There's a big difference between upstate and downstate as far as coverages. And what we're finding down here in downstate where we're located, dental and long-term disability are big coverages that all the districts and the teachers especially are negotiating.
So it's part of their contracts.
Right, and give you a little insight to what we're running into. I know that upstate where you're located and further up, it's not such a big deal, but down here it is.
Okay.
As far as dental plans, there are so many different options, the insured versus the fully insured, the different maximums, the different types of plans. If anybody is interested in it, there are lots of questions that need to be asked in order to determine the best needs for everybody in the district.
So you really do need to do those surveys and find out the age ranges and what would be most beneficial. Are they looking for braces? Are they looking for root canals? What would be most helpful?
Well, yeah, they want it to be a preventative type of plan where you're quote unquote forcing everybody to get good oral care so that they don't need the more expensive bridges and dentures and all of that versus just an all-encompassing plan where you just get all services completed. There's also different maximums. You can get a $1,000 maximum plan, or you can get a $2,000 maximum plan, depending upon, again, the needs of the district, the size of the district, the network
premiums,
involved, the percentage of the benefits that are payable. You can do a scheduled plan payable at 100%, or you can get a plan payable at 80% or 50%.
Of the
There is,
schedule amount.
you know, there's a lot of different options that districts and entities can go to.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to Bill and Ellen and Sue and Marcia for putting this all together. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. And those of you who are scheduled for the online course of Benefits Administration, make sure you take a look at the information on what's required of you between now and September 22nd. You can go back to those first few slides that Marcia prepared. And if you're not part of this online course, maybe you want to consider doing that. The next webinar is on September 22, and we also have a webinar tomorrow, and it is on cash flow and fund balance, and certainly welcome to have you join us. So thank you, and Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Donna. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's New York State ASBO webinar. Thank you all for attending, and have a great day.